Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. Today we start our player evaluations from 2024, starting with the backstop, JT Realmuto. What needs to change next year for him to be more productive? We'll discuss on today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that really helps us out here on Locked On Phillies. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk radio space here in Philadelphia. I've been on the air over at 97.5 The Fanatic for 5 years now doing sports talk radio. I've had 3 seasons as a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member, and this is my 3rd season as the host of Locked On Phillies. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. So today, we're going to begin our 2024 player evaluations. We're going to look at everybody on the roster and a couple of fringe guys, as well as the manager, the president of baseball operations. So it's going to be a long process for breaking down all of these. Every player is pretty much going to get their own individual episode. And today we start with the backstop, JT Realmuto. We're going to go by position number. So we're going to start with the catcher and move around the infield, outfield, depth pieces, starting rotation, the bullpen. We're going to break down everything because there were some great seasons. There were some okay seasons. There were some bad seasons. And I don't know if I would put JT Realmuto as a bad season, but we're going to discuss why his production was down. We're also going to talk a little later on about how less playing time could help him in 2025. And Rob Thompson talked about that and what a good backup for JT Realmuto will look like if you indeed want the Phillies to go in a different direction with the backup catcher position. So a lot of stuff to get into with JT. First, let's give you the number breakdown. So he batted .266 in 2024, this past season. Only hit 14 home runs, which from the catcher position in general is not a bad number, but for JT Realmuto is a little bit under where you'd want the production level to be power-wise. He had over 100 hits in 380 at-bats. His WAR 3.0. So, if that's a bad season, he's a pretty darn good catcher. But he wasn't productive down the stretch, and he wasn't good enough in the postseason. He had a really bad series against the Mets. So what do we basically break down JT Realmuto's 2024 season as? I think this was the first definitive season where we can say JT Realmuto is on the back end of his career. Now, that doesn't mean he's retiring tomorrow or next year or the year after that. The dude's an athlete. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a position change at some point in his career. Probably not here in Philadelphia because I don't know where you could move him to. We'll talk about that when we look forward to the 2025 season in our next segment. But when I look at JT Realmuto's season this year, I say, okay, he's starting to look old. And he had knee surgery partway through the year. It could have been as simple as, hey, he got the knee surgery to clean some stuff up, but it was never going to be 100%. We should have probably expected he wasn't going to look his best down the stretch, but you expected him to put together more productive at-bats than what he did. And part of the issue with JT Realmuto's season was, one, he wasn't as pop off the screen at you if you were watching at home or flash on the field at you if you were watching at the ballpark defensively. Not to say he was a bad defender this year. JT Realmuto is still a very, very good defensive catcher. But you could see that there's just like every once in a while a step here, a step there where it's just like, I would have thrown that guy out. Okay, he would have made that play. And catchers don't get like that many plays to make. And again, exceptional defensive catcher still. But he's not quite the best catcher in baseball, no debate, JT Realmuto, easy, like he was for the first couple seasons here in Philadelphia. Now he's a plus catcher, right? And that is the difference. When the bar is set so high and you turn into a guy who's above average as opposed to elite, well, that does change the ceiling of the team a little bit. But can JT Realmuto still be great? I think so. The tough thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to limit his playing time because he's just a guy, he's caught so many games. He's had so many just wear and tear days on those knees and the lower back and the whole body in general. The guy gets banged up, and he is as tough as anybody in baseball. I don't think that I could pick a player tougher than JT Realmuto. And I'm not just talking about on the Phillies. I'm talking about in the major league. So if there's a dude that wants to go out there and play every darn day, it's JT. And that's where the conversation gets tricky because he's not going to want to play less. And your team doesn't necessarily get better by JT Realmuto playing less, but you do get into a spot where you look at his season and you say, okay, the average looks solid. 266 in today's baseball is not bad at all, right? That's a pretty darn good number from your backstop, and you got to feel good about that. But then you look at some of the power numbers, and you see 14 home runs, and then you see, well, only 18 doubles on the season, only one triple. I mean, for example, in 2023, he had 28 doubles. In 2022, he had 26 doubles. In 2021, he had 25 doubles in his all-star year, his second all-star year with the Philadelphia Phillies. Had 36 doubles back in 19. 2020, you got to wipe because it's a COVID-shortened season. But when you look at that and you say this is his first season under 25 doubles in 4 years, well, that is a major concern. The walks were also down. He only had 27 walks this year. And part of that, I think, is he was pressing a little bit at the plate because he wasn't able to create the power numbers that he was used to. When you look at the home runs, he had 20 last year, 22 the year before. Again, 14 this season. So that's the biggest thing. How do you up the power numbers for JT Realmuto? Power is a lot easier when your body's feeling 100%. And again, I'll go back to the knee surgery. That could have been a huge part of the equation that we don't give enough validity to when we talk about why JT Realmuto looked rough at points this season. But at the same time, if you're going to be out there on the field, you got to go out there and produce. And if you're expecting JT Realmuto to give you a certain level of production, he did not reach that this year. So I'm going to give everybody grades. I'm going to tell you that at the end of this first segment, what I grade out JT Realmuto's 2024 season. But it was more of a middle-of-the-road season from him. And based on his previous production, that can be seen as underproducing. I don't want to take JT Realmuto to task. Over the postseason series, absolutely, but that's 4 games, and there are guys that had bad series. The entire bullpen basically did. There were other guys in the lineup that did, but he was definitely not putting together good at-bats in the postseason. Now, have we seen JT Realmuto be clutch in the postseason before? Absolutely. Think about it. Realmuto could run for days. That was 2 years ago. Now, 2 years ago can be a long time in the life of a major league catcher, but the guys had big at-bats in big spots for the Phillies. It's not so much the guy's not ready for the moment. It's that how do you manage a catcher that has caught an unbelievable amount of innings and has wear and tear on his body, and how do you deal with that going into what I don't want to necessarily call it the twilight of his career, but on the backside. We've had this conversation about JT Realmuto's, like the backside of his career. I almost worded that poorly. We had this conversation about the natural regression due to age with JT Realmuto for what feels like 3 seasons now, because catchers go quick. It's why Bryce Harper played right field and now first base, came up as a catcher. You want to bring these star players out from behind the dish to save and extend their career. When JT's a catcher through and through, always has been, very possibly always will be at the major league level. And he's a guy that you look at and say, okay, there needs to be more management with JT Realmuto now. He's not a pencil in the lineup every day type of guy at this point in his career, I don't think. And that decreases the ceiling of the Philadelphia Phillies baseball team, but that is reality for where we're at right now. Outside of the power numbers being down, I don't think JT Realmuto had like an awful year at the plate. It's just you have come to expect him to have impact at bats, and he didn't have many impact at bats this year, where it's just like JT's up in a big spot, comes through when the team needs him most. That wasn't really his role with the team this year. Or that's not really the role he stepped into with the team this year. And I'm sure he's not happy with his season. And I'm sure the organization, well, I know the organization isn't thrilled with his season because they wouldn't be talking about getting him more rest so he can be more productive, because that's certainly something Rob Thompson talked about in his end-of-year press conference. So, all of that being said, the evaluation for JT Realmuto's 2024 season, I'm going to give him, I'll put him right in the middle. I'm going to give him a C, okay? We're going to give him a C because it's still a very productive season by catcher standards. And it was still a good season. Like, you got a 3 WAR. Like, I'm not a huge WAR guy, but you can't look at that and say, well, bad season from JT Realmuto. Like, no, he's still a very good Major League Baseball player, and we're still very lucky to have him on this team. It's just not the guy that could take over the game from behind the dish and put together amazing at-bats and show pop and hit 20 home runs and have nearly 30 doubles and have all this production and all these RBIs from that spot where you don't normally get it. He's not that guy anymore. He had a middle-of-the-road season by his standards. It is still a plus season by catcher standards, but I got to hold him to what you expect from him, and it was just a year from JT Realmuto. So tough start to the evaluations with a guy that didn't exactly play up to complete expectations, but still, you have faith in him going forward. But what's that role going to look like in 2025? We're going to discuss if less playing time is indeed the right way to handle JT Realmuto's 2025 season as the catcher of the Philadelphia Phillies. He will be the catcher next year. He will be back. But what does it look like exactly? We'll talk about it as we continue today's episode. But let's talk about Game Time first, because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app, they go down the closer it gets to the first pitch or tip-off, puck drop, kickoff, anything. A lot of great sports going on right now. We'll talk about that in a second. But they've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, all this great stuff that makes your ticket buying experience as good as it can possibly be. Now, obviously, the Phillies season's been over, and you're probably not going to the World Series if you're a Phillies fan. No one wants to watch Dodgers, Yankees in person. But the Eagles are playing. The Sixers get going tomorrow night. The Flyers are playing right now as I'm recording this. There are a lot of great games in town. Also, you can go to comedy, concerts, theater, all of this great stuff, all of those nights out that you want to have. If you need a ticket to go to the event, you can get it through Game Time. So go ahead and check them out. And you can also get special deals. That all-in pricing means you see all the fees up front, so you don't have to worry about getting to the final screen and all of a sudden your $60 ticket is now a $160 ticket. No, they'll show you everything up front, including the view from your seat at the event. And their lowest price guarantee means if you find a seat in the same row and section for less on a competitive site or anywhere else, you'll get 110% of the difference back. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and more tickets with Game Time picks, and download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so what will 2025 look like for JT Realmuto? I would imagine that it would be a significant, I'm going to say significant decrease in innings caught. Now, he played this year 99 games, so he didn't even get to the 100 mark. Part of that surgery, right? And he missed time, and that's not what you want. You can't expect, okay, well, he played 99 this year. They need to cut back on that number. Part of that is the time on the injured list. So what I would say for JT is you're probably looking at right about that number again in 2025, though. That would be ideal. I'm going to shoot to have him be in 100 games in 2025. And that might feel low. You might say, well, who's going to catch the other 62 games for the Philadelphia Phillies? Is it going to be Garrett Stubbs? We're going to talk about what the perfect backup would look like, because I'll tell you, I don't think it is Garrett Stubbs. One of the number one things that could help out JT Realmuto is Dave Dombrowski. If Dombrowski goes out and gets a backup catcher that you can play for 62 games, or even if it's like 50 games that JT plays 112, that's totally fine. I think the mark should be somewhere between 100 and 115 games for JT Realmuto. And while that might seem low, guess what? We're going to get real annoyed in April and May and June, July and August and September when there are these give up almost lineups, or not give up lineups, but like JT Realmuto's not playing. You want to say, how much rest does this guy need? But if you get to October and he's more productive and he's feeling rested and he's ready to go and his body feels better and he can put together better at bats because of it, it's all going to pay off. And I think you have to try it, because there's one thing for sure that's not going to help him in 2025. And that's playing him every game and putting him out there every day and letting him get banged up more and more wear and tear on the knees. More playing time is not the answer for JT Realmuto. He is a guy where you need to mitigate his playing time. We talk about all the time in the NBA, load management. I'm not saying treat him like Joel Embiid, where he gets every other day off. But I am saying there needs to be a concerted plan for JT Realmuto in 2025 that involves the limiting of his games played. And that doesn't even totally come from production. If he comes out in 2025 and bats 266 and hits 14 home runs and has a 3 WAR and has 18 doubles and How many RBIs do they have? I still have it up here. It has 47 RBIs again. That's not like, we're not going to pull our hair out over that. If he's more productive in the postseason, that'll certainly help. But like I'm saying, it's not like, oh, if JT does that again, this team will never win. No, they can win with production from the catcher spot like that. But what you want to try and do is make sure that sustained production over the course of the season. You don't lose him to injury. You don't have a month and a half where Rafael Marchand and Garrett Stubbs are your guys back there, and you're trying to figure out how that tandem survives a tough stretch. And that was in a stretch where the Philadelphia Phillies weren't playing good baseball. I do have to believe that absolutely had an effect on the team not having JT, because he's the guy that kind of balances out the lineup. He's not a top part of the lineup anymore. But you put him at 6, you put him at 7, and he's supposed to be the guy that's the veteran hitter in the lower part of the order that keeps everything level. And that's what's really important. You can get that with a guy batting 266, but he has to be feeling good and available as much as possible. And to keep him available, it might mean taking him off the field at times. So he absolutely needs less playing time in 2025. And I need something from JT Realmuto too. I need something from the player. Oftentimes when I do these reviews of seasons, I'm talking about what does the player need to do? Hit better, field better, run better, create more power, do all this stuff on the field. And that's an easy ask, because it's easy to look at a guy who hit like 220 and say, I need you to put together better, cleaner at bats and get that average higher. Someone who needs to show power and say, I need 10 more home runs out of you, stuff like that. This is going to be a tough ask, because I'm going to ask a Tiger to change his stripes. We talked about JT Realmuto being one of the toughest guys in baseball. For my money, the toughest. I'm going to need him to put that in his back pocket. I'm going to need him when Rob Thompson has the conversation with him about, hey, we want to play you less in 2025 to extend your career, to up your production, to make your body feel better day in and day out. I need him to take the part of him that thinks he's 25 years old still and say, okay, it's time for that guy to move on. It's time for me to be the man that I am at this point in my career. And it's time for me to accept that I'm not going to play every single day and be the Iron Man that I want to be. He wants to help the team, and that's going to be a tough thing. Like, I'll tell you, I am not remotely, this might come as a shock to you, I'm not remotely the athlete that JT Realmuto is. And if somebody tried to take me out of a game, whether it was a competitive game right now, like a men's league game, anything like that, absolutely not. I want to be on the field with my guys. I don't care if I'm hurt. I don't care if I'm sore. I don't care if I'm tired. I don't care if I stink. I want to be out there because that's what I'm here to do. And I get that. But like, there comes a time in every Major League Baseball's career, player's career, where you have to accept the fact that you're on the back end. And I'm going to have to ask JT Realmuto, when he has that conversation with Rob Thompson, to accept what the team wants to do. Don't force your way out there, because he could. He carries that type of weight. JT could argue his way into playing more innings. He could argue his way into playing more games. He could argue his way out of the proposed strategy by Rob Thompson and the Philadelphia Phillies. And the biggest thing that I need to see from him is maturity. And JT is a mature player. He's a guy that's a good leader. He's a great clubhouse guy. I'm not saying he's ever been an immature guy when it comes to how he interacts with his teammates and the organization. But what I am saying is, you need to take a look in the mirror and say, okay, this is probably what's best for me. And I need to fight against my instinct to say I got to be out there every single day. I mean, this is a dude at this point where you're looking at a 33-year-old, and he's going to turn 34 in the next, 150 days or so. I'm trying to do some math. March 18th. So it'll be 34 before the 2024 season starts in earnest. It's just, you're not going to put a 34-year-old catcher out there every single day and expect them to be as productive. So I'm asking JT, the number one thing you can do, treat yourself as a 34-year-old. Treat yourself as a guy whose body doesn't feel all that good. Treat yourself as a guy that could have a high level of production in a smaller sample size and buy into that role. It's probably been, never that JT Realmuto has ever been asked to buy into a different role. I'm sure he's always been the guy on every team he's ever played for, from when he started playing baseball to really this season with the Philadelphia Phillies. And that's going to be a tough thing for him to come to terms with. But that's the biggest thing that he can do. And something that could make it easier on him is if Dave Dombrowski and Sam Fuld and the Philadelphia Phillies front office go out and get a better backup for the 2025 season than Garrett Stubbs. Listen, I love Garrett Stubbs. I do. The guy, the locker room dude, I think he is an underrated baseball player because people treat him like he stinks. Garrett Stubbs doesn't stink. But is he a guy that you can look at and say, you're the perfect backup for JT Realmuto, for where Realmuto's at in his career? I don't think so. So what would the perfect backup look like? We're going to discuss that coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But let's talk about FanDuel first. They're the absolute best in America's #1 sportsbook. You've heard me talk about them basically the whole time that I've been a host of Locked On Phillies. And the NFL season is rolling. You got the World Series going. NBA's kicking off. NHL has been going. College football is getting really, really interesting this time of year. There's a lot of stuff that you can bet on with FanDuel. They have a lot of great props and parlays and different promos that you'll be able to take advantage of. And the best thing that I love to do on FanDuel, I think this is a weakness in the gambling market. I still don't think they fully figured this out. They've gotten better, but this is where I exploit Vegas if I can. And this is what you should do with FanDuel. Live bets. You get a feel for what's going on in the game. You get to see things that necessarily like the algorithms and the people tracking stuff don't have to see. So when you make bets in during a game or when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets with FanDuel. It makes it so convenient. I think it's the best way to win, and they're also going to help you out on the money side. You're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet with FanDuel. Again, that's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So what are you waiting? Go ahead and check out America. What are you waiting for, I should say? Go ahead and check out America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com. So what would a perfect backup catcher look like for the Philadelphia Phillies? Because you've already heard me say it a billion times during this episode. You need to do something different at the backup catcher position in 2025. Now, we'll talk about Garrett Stubbs' season, and we'll evaluate him when we get to him, when we go through these player evaluations. But part of JT Realmuto's evaluation is an evaluation of the backup. Do I think that the Philadelphia Phillies have an in-house option that's better than Garrett Stubbs? I believe Rafael Marchand could be that guy. Here's the problem. Marchand has had injury issues throughout his career in the minor leagues, and that's not the most ideal thing for a guy that you're expecting to spell an older player. You need the backup to be readily available. You need that guy to be ironclad when it comes to going out there. Now, he may only catch, whoever the backup is, like I said, 50, 60 games for the 2025 season, but that's a good amount of games for a guy that hasn't had a full season at the major league level. That's a good amount of games for a guy that's been banged up throughout his career. So is Marchand the guy? When I look at the talent level, I say he could be. He's a talented baseball player. Got some offensive production. Solid defensive guy. Not JT Realmuto, but nobody really is. So could that be the answer? Sure. I would like a guy who's a little bit more durable. And Rafael Marchand is also a guy that is just, I'm going to get greedy here, all right? Some of this is not realistic. I'm stating that just from the start, so you're aware that I'm not expecting them to go trade for like some 25-year-old all-star catcher. Like that's just, it's not realistic that guy is going to be out there, available, and the Phillies are going to acquire him with JT Realmuto, who's still going to be their starter. But I do look at Marchand and say, well, he's got some wear and tear on him already. He's got these injuries already. Is he a long-term solution at catcher? I don't know that he is, but could he be the guy that steps in as the backup this next year for JT Realmuto? He could be. I would not be mad if the Philadelphia Phillies end up saying, like, Marchand's our second catcher. That's the guy we're rolling with. If we're getting ready for opening day, he's on the opening day roster as the backup catcher. I'm not going to be like saying, oh, well, Dave Dombrowski in the front office, they messed up this offseason. They messed up this position. I'm good with Rafael Marchand. But could the Philadelphia Phillies do better? I think they could. I would like a guy with more major league experience because, frankly, we've seen a small sample size of Rafael Marchand at the highest level, at the major league level. And while he was productive in ways, there were also some growing pains, and there will continue to be growing pains with him. I almost want the Phillies to go out and get, like, the age range that I'm thinking is a guy 27 to 30, right? 30 might be a little bit old, but 27, 28, that's probably the sweet spot of where you want to shoot for. And I'd like to see it be a guy that you could see with progression take over this role from JT Realmuto in the future. I would be floored, right, if JT Realmuto gets another contract with the Philadelphia Phillies. I would be absolutely floored because catchers just don't last that long. It's not because we don't like JT. It's not because he's not still not somewhat productive. See, I'm underselling him because of how high he set the bar for himself. It's not that he's not still productive. It's that at some point you have to say somebody's going to give this guy a lot of money on another contract. The back end of that contract is probably not going to look great. Is that what's best for sustaining the window of this team? And it's probably not. So what I'd like to see the Phillies do is bring in a guy this offseason that they could see being here for 4 or 5 years, that they could see progressing into a starting catcher at the major league level, a plus backup, maybe a guy that started somewhere else and that team just isn't in a contention window and they don't want to pay him in free agency. Maybe a guy that you have to trade for that's a younger guy, 27, 28 or something like that, that's projectable. You could go get a higher level prospect guy, a AAA catcher that you think is ready for the next step. But again, we talked about the growing pains with Rafael Marchand. That's kind of iffy, right? You don't want to put too much on the plate of a guy who's not comfortable at this level yet, which was part of the beef with Marchand. So the ideal look at a backup catcher would be, again, a guy who can catch like 60 games. He doesn't have to be Iron Man, but I want him to be available for those 60 games. So I prefer to not have a guy with injury issues at a position that's so physically intensive. The age around 27 to 28, you'd want to have a guy that is similar. Well, I don't know. You can't really have a similar offensive catcher to JT Realmuto. You can't. Because that guy just doesn't really exist. You're not going to get guys at that position that play plus defense, that are super athletes, can run, can field, can hit for power, averaging like 20-some doubles or 20-some home runs as well. Like, you're not going to see that. Why did I say 20-some doubles? Like 40-some doubles or 30-some doubles and 20-some home runs. Like, you're not going to see that for the Philadelphia. Yeah, 20-some doubles was right. 20-some home runs, also right. Bottom line is, you're not going to find that type of production from a guy that's just out there that another team doesn't already have and a team wants to move on from or not pay in free agency. So how do you complement what JT Realmuto does, and how do you complement what the rest of the team does? Part of the issue with the Philadelphia Phillies for the past couple of years has been this whole long ball or nothing, hit the homer or go home type of mentality. And while JT Realmuto is not that guy, he is a guy that relies on the power numbers more than the average catcher. You don't really get guys very much that hit for average out of the catcher position. But if I was going to build the perfect backup, I would say that he's a guy that's played at the major league level that you could see batting 270, 275, maybe even 280 on a good year. Maybe not adding power because you have enough power in this lineup still. You're going to have plenty of power next year. But wouldn't it be nice if the guy that split time with JT Realmuto was able to go up there and hit for average, put together good at-bats, walk a bunch, have a great command of the strike zone, like put together at-bats that are not your typical Philadelphia Phillies at-bats. There's not many ways where you can change this team, but if you've got a guy that's going to play 50 or 60 games, that's going to be a significant impact on the style of this team in one of the few ways that you can alter things. So if you're one of those people that chases the small ball approach, the hit a guy over approach, the doing the little things right approach, I would look for a catcher that hits more for average than for those power numbers. Tough to do because a lot of these guys are a little bit less, not less athletic. You got to be an athlete to be a professional catcher, but they're not running like the wind like JT Realmuto. They're probably a little bit chunkier, right? We'll just say it. Catchers are built a little bit thicker. So normally that leads to power, or it leads to just being a defensive guy or stuff like that. But you'd like to find a catcher who is a solid defender, just solid defender, not a major drop off when he goes in the game, is one also good at managing a team. You got to look at how they manage the pitching staff and the bullpen, but I think JT will help with that significantly. He'll be able to talk guys up, but also hits for average and is available. And you could see doing this for a while with a projectable future. That's a lot of stuff on the wish list. I know some of that's not realistic, but that's the blueprint for what a backup catcher would be, because JT Realmuto in 2025, he's not going to have the exact same role on this team. He's starting catcher, but he's not as clear-cut, start every game type of catcher. So first evaluation and already a potential change for the Phillies. There may be more than we initially thought that can change about this team with how you change guys' roles and how we evaluate their 2024 season. But that's definitely one of them. So coming up next, first base, Bryce Harper. This is going to be a fun one, right? On tomorrow's episode, we're going to break down Bryce Harper's 2024 season. Some ups, some downs, but man, I love doing this episode every year because he's amazing. He's one of the greatest baseball players I've ever seen. And that'll be fun to do. So we'll talk about that in tomorrow's episode. But that's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us here on Locked On Phillies. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure, again, you're rating and reviewing wherever you consume this in podcast form. Subscribe to the YouTube so you get notifications when new episodes are posted. And it really helps me out here on Locked On Phillies if you do that. And I'll talk to you tomorrow on our next episode.